What's up everybody, how's it going, and welcome to this episode of Car Rant. Today we're doing a motor swap because I was an idiot. So I'm just putting it out there that I done messed up. I hit a bump on this and completely ripped out my exhaust. It just, it wasn't a good time. You can see the impact I had with the ground because of a speed bump that I was not anticipating being there. Hit it way too fast. Smash it on the ground. So now this engine can no longer have an exhaust put on it because the studs are completely tore off. And instead of trying to take these studs out just because of how difficultly seized in they are, we're just going to swap over the transmission and do a full-on engine swap. I've already gone ahead and taken the red Metropolitan engine out because obviously that's going to the truck is built, forgive that mess, but that's where it's going. So we're going to take this guy, swap as many of the parts as we can from this one onto this one before we actually proceed to take the old engine off, put this one on. Look, a man we haven't seen in a while. You live it.
So
my guess is we can have this done in an hour. He thinks it'll be maybe a bit more, close to 2 or 3. I don't know.
I'm saying it's at least 2 to 2.5.
We'll see how it goes. First things first, we gotta roll this outside. Wheel, and then the transmission. We've done this enough on this channel. We're just gonna go ahead and do it. Maybe time lapse us putting the transmission back together on the new one. But yeah, it's actually really simple. Believe it or not, it's like 5 bolts that hold that thing together. Just the 4 that's in the case and then the 1 that's on the back. And on top of that, the only other thing that really needs to come off is obviously the lines, whatever, but the rad cover and the carburetor. I guess it's actually a really simple job once you get through all the nonsense. And then unbolt it from the chassis, slap on the new guy. Please enlighten the class. How did you get that off? Because it took me 5 hours the first time. You just wiggled it. There you go, kids. The easy way to get this, watch, it won't come off now.
I'll make it come off.
That would be a bad thing. Oh, that would be so terrible if it couldn't come off. Oh, it's out. There we go. Ta-da! Hey, what do we do with parts we don't like?
Oh, I'm on camera.
What do you do with parts we don't like?
Disrespect.
Disrespect. So, had to take the fairings off because for whatever reason, not entirely sure to be honest with you why it's like this, but on the Metropolitan, because of the trunk latch release system, I guess there's something to counter pull. And since obviously ours doesn't work because of this bump up in the frame, we got to remove this from up here. It's a part of this assembly. It's just 2 10 mils and it comes off. And then with a little bit of finagling, you can get this out. If you're doing this at home, you're going to have to do this if you're going to change the engine out for whatever reason, because it is directly attached to the upper assembly. Now, he's working on getting the transmission off. I'm going to go ahead and start cleaning up the variator and getting it ready and slapping it on our other engine, which is way back in the darkness. And I'll come back and I get the fun job. I have to undo these 2 bus plugs because they go to the stator. And after that, it's disconnecting the little lines once we get the engine off and it should be good to go. It's really not too bad. It's actually a fairly straightforward job. So there are a number of reasons why you need to replace your engine. One being a blown motor, another being some unexplainable damage or things of that nature. So that's why we figured it would be a good idea to film this, because otherwise there's not a lot of this type of content out there where people are replacing it with a stock setup. And we're showing you how to replace it using the stock engine for these things. So that's why we were like, yeah, let's just go ahead and film it. That plug he's working on right there, that is part of the stator. It is one of the hardest plugs to take off. It's extremely tight, but do your best not to damage it or else you're gonna have to replace part of your harness, because that goes directly to the brain and to the power system. So it's just not wise to really mess with that cable. On the old, or well, the new engine, we ended up cutting this just because of the fact that that old harness is messed up. We don't need to worry about it. whereas this harness is perfectly fine. It's set up for our new parts like LED light bars and whatnot. So that's just something to keep in mind. When you drain your coolant, please drain responsibly. We have a little bit of spillage. We'll be able to wash it up with some water. Coolant is bad for animals of multiple varieties, but namely cats. So shout outs to Will Owens for reminding me every time to do that. But otherwise, once this is off, we're unbolting this thing from the main harness, disconnecting the gas line, and this old engine will be free. And more importantly, we can take the transmission off. After we take the transmission off, I'm going to translate it onto the other engine and bring the new engine here. It's all taken apart now. Very carefully set this down so we won't scratch anything up. This engine has had some compression issues. It's had a number of other issues as well. Some oil problems, things like that. So this is going to have a proper send-off to the local dump, or maybe even a machine recycling center, just so that they can possibly get something out of this. Yep, this engine served us pretty well. Did you realize that we actually put about 1,000 miles on this motor?
Yeah.
Kind of hard to believe. You're like, well, we didn't go anywhere. We just went locally, but like, mileage racks up when you drive around locally. It's pretty crazy. So, rest in peace, fella. You lived a tough life, a lot of R&D, but your sacrifices are in vain. Because everything you did, we're now about to do better. Alright, so we've got the transmission mounted, we've got the variator bolted. Like I said, check in our corner there if you want to see how we worked on that whole assembly. It's real straightforward. But we've got a little bit of a hiccup. We used to have a nut that would go here that would hold our assembly together, but when we had the accident, the nut was gone. And in fact, this whole thing was rocking loosely in there. So thank God we did this, or else this could have been a very, very dangerous thing to have no nut there. If we hit a bump just right, could have smacked the engine, broke the engine, got ourselves hurt, or killed. So it's definitely a good thing we decided to do this job. We shortened up our shocks so that it sits a little bit more like this on the road, because I personally think that would look nicer, especially once we get the new handlebar setup done. Now it's just the easy job of bolting up, plugging up all the extra bits and pieces. We're going to leave the brain off to the side so we can get this figured out and have ease of access to that area. But after that, the rest of this should be pretty straightforward. Got to fill this thing up with some coolant, get the coolant flow going. That way this thing is straight and solid. I'm going to drain what's left of it out. And yeah, should be able to start this up in about a couple minutes. After that, it's ride time. Dude, that sounds better. Oh my god. That sounds way better. Oh, that is satisfying. I'm genuinely excited to see what this is going to sound like under load and driving it and all that. Oh yeah, you gotta fix that cable. Okay. This is clearly a Metropolitan engine. after a little bit of tuning and a little bit of finessing, there is something that you do need to do if you have an engine from a Metropolitan. Make sure the restrictor plate is not in the manifold. Basically, the restrictor plate is something that limits the amount of airflow and limits the amount of air-fuel mix specifically that makes it into the engine so that it can be burned. No matter how much carb tuning you do, you will never overcome this restrictor plate unless you remove it. Ruckuses don't have this issue, but at least as far as I'm aware they don't. But especially Metro 2s, it's definitely a big problem. It's something that needs to be addressed if you're going to do a motor swap onto a Metropolitan. What I can say is that once we pulled that out and we did a little bit more carb tuning and a little bit more finessing with this thing, we hit 42 miles an hour in a section that I could normally only hit about 35 to 38, and that's on used oil. This is a superior setup compared to what it used to be. I'm really glad I spent the time to invest in the red Metro that became the donor for this thing, because otherwise this would have been a really sad day just sitting here with a completely dead, useless bike. But with that said, you can probably hear the fans running because it's real hot in this garage. I got my dog with me. We're gonna go back to the AC and chill out for a bit, and then when we come back on the next episode that you're gonna see, we got some big upgrades coming for both the Metropolitan and our Met Truck build. And I'm actually looking at the box next to me right now. I hope you guys are ready, because I think we can have the Met Truck running in the next episode we do about it. So without further ado, God bless you guys, and we'll see you next time. Peace!